friends, this morning I met a few friends from my Bible study group at a diner again, and everyone ordered their usual breakfast: pancakes, sausage, hash browns, and of course, eggs. Scrambled, fried, poached, sunny side up. You name it. One friend looked at my plate and said, "You're the healthy one, right? You eat eggs, don't you?" They are full of protein. That's the question nearly everyone asks. Are eggs really the perfect food, or have we been sold a story? So today we're cracking open the truth about eggs, how they affect your cholesterol, diabetes, microbiome, and immune system. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the bad cholesterol theory was only a fraction of the real story, and how the real culprit might be something we've overlooked and ignored all along. Inflammation. Will eggs cause or reduce inflammation? Well, the answer isn't so simple. It depends on the angle of your lens. So let's start with the basics. Well, one large egg has about 70 calories, 6 grams of protein, 5 grams of fat, of which 1.6 grams is saturated fat, and 186 milligrams is cholesterol. That means 2 eggs, what most people eat for breakfast, contain nearly 400 milligrams of cholesterol, more than the total daily limit once recommended by the American Heart Association. But wait, didn't they say dietary cholesterol isn't the problem anymore? And that's partially true unless you're a super absorber. And we'll get to super absorbing cholesterol later. And the truth is simply more nuanced. So whenever people buy eggs, notice there's always a choice: brown or white eggs. And there's a price difference. Brown eggs often cost more and makes people assume that they're healthier or more natural. So what's really the truth? Well, you see, the color of the eggshell actually comes from the breed of chicken, not from its nutrition or environment. So white eggs come from hens with white feathers and white earlobes. Yes, birds have ears. They usually come from breeds like white leghorn. Brown eggs come from hens with red feathers and red earlobes, such as Rhode Island Reds or Plymouth Rocks. That's simply it. It's purely genetic. The pigment that makes these brown eggs brown is called photoporphyrin 9. It's a natural pigment found from the blood of hens. It's basically part of their hemoglobin. We have hemoglobin too. Now, it stains the outer shell as the egg forms, but it doesn't change what's inside the egg. So nutritionally, brown and white eggs are virtually identical in calories, in proteins, in fat, and in cholesterol. And the price difference usually reflects the cost of the breed, the feed, and farming method. It's really not nutrition. However, there is a more subtle difference that can matter, and that is the color of the egg yolk. You've probably noticed that some yolks are pale yellow, while others are a deep golden or even orange. That color comes from carotenoids, plant pigments like lutein and zeaxanthin that hens absorb from their diet. Now, when hens eat greens, marigold or petals, corn, alfalfa, the yolks become richer in color and slightly higher in antioxidants. But when they're fed mostly corn or soy feed or confined in barns, the yolks look pale. So a darker yolk doesn't mean more protein or less cholesterol, but it does mean that that hen ate more plant-rich diet. Now, this does translate into higher carotenoids, which are beneficial for your eye and your brain health. But still, the benefit is so small compared to just eating what the hens eat, basically whole plants. Now, to get the level of carotenoids from eating, let's say, a cup of spinach or a cup of kale directly, you would have to eat like 50 eggs, because one of these egg yolks might have 0.2 milligrams of lutein, while a cup of spinach is over 10 milligrams. And obviously eating 50 egg yolks, that's not practical. But what about free-range, cage-free, and omega-3 eggs? Now, I threw away the cartons because I don't like to handle cartons. But some of the cartons may say omega-3, enriched, or pasture-raised. That means the hens were fed flaxseed, chia, or fish oil, boosting their omega-3 content in their yolks. That's an improvement, but still pretty modest, because there's about 100 milligrams of omega-3s per eggs, below that from what you'd get from, let's say, a tablespoon of flax seeds or a few walnuts. Now, pasture-raised eggs also also tend to have deeper yolk color and slightly more vitamin D and E. But again, that's not enough to offset the unhealthy ingredients in this egg. That's right, there's unhealthy ingredients. But an orange yolk is more nutritious overall compared to pale yolks that the RDA does not recognize, despite the fact that lutein and zeaxanthin are literally pigments in the back of your retina. And your retina is important for you to see. When we talk about eggs and health, most people are so focused on their own personal food, their breakfast, whether it has cholesterol or protein, but they lose sight of a huge global problem: drug resistance and flu pandemics. They literally come back to bite all of us with higher egg prices and healthcare costs. Do you know that many industries are dependent upon eggs? That's $1.6 trillion, folks. And that's not even including the eggs that people are eating for breakfast. A few months ago, one of my close friends, they called me from the urgent care and they said, "I just can't believe this. I've had 3 urinary tract infections in the last 6 months. And this time the antibiotic isn't working." So when the doctor finally got her cultures back, it showed something alarming: multi-drug resistant E. coli, the kind that laughs at most antibiotics. Now that's when it hit her how personal drug resistance can be for her and the rest of us. Now, I've been telling her about drug resistance for years, and she just thought it was like something that affected hospitals or in labs. Well, it's showing up now in people, normal people like you and I. And here's the part that almost nobody talks about. One of the biggest breeding grounds for antibiotic drug resistant bacteria are chickens, especially those raised for eggs and meat, because they're raised in crowded industrial farms. So every year, multi-millions of hens, they live in environments so stressful and so unsanitary that antibiotics are added to their feed just to keep the infection under control so that they can get them to market. Now, these bacteria, they adapt, they evolve every 15 minutes, including E. coli species that live on chickens and are genetically identical to the ones that cause urinary tract infections in people. And in fact, studies have traced drug-resistant urinary tract infection outbreaks in women directly linked to poultry strains found in your local grocery store. And this is why in my household, we don't handle any raw meat or eggs or any kind of raw whatever animal product without wearing gloves. Contamination starts in the supermarket from handling the raw products, and then you bring it home. You're exposing yourself, your food, your environment to drug-resistant germs. And then when you eat it, especially if you eat it undercooked, those running yellow yolks, I know they are delicious. Well, you're going to be eating some drug-resistant bacteria that can enter into your gut quietly, waiting for the right opportunity to cause an infection. So when we talk about antibiotic resistance, it's not an abstract global health statistic. It's a reason why your next urinary tract infection may not respond to treatment, or the fact that you're even getting a urinary tract infection at all. That's not normal, folks. And it starts on the farms that produce these very eggs that people eat for breakfast. And then you have experts who say that organic doesn't make a difference, that there's no health benefit. Well, their mindset is very narrow-minded, and they don't realize that certified organic eggs come from hens that are never given antibiotics by law. So yes, I recommend organic products for people, not just for the people who are eating them, but for all of us who will benefit. It makes a huge difference in people's health that may not be able to be measured by a vitamin test. Now, pasture-raised eggs in theory are cleaner and less crowded. Avoid vague marketing scams like natural, cage-free. Those still allow antibiotic feed or medicated starter feed for chicks. Fewer antibiotics on the farm means fewer resistant bacteria in our food system and water supply. And every small shift in every single consumer that demands antibiotic clean food will push the industry towards a safer, more sustainable practice for all of humanity. Now, most commercial eggs come from intensive farm factories where tens of thousands of hens are packed into cages. And to keep them alive and productive in these crowded conditions, producers routinely use antibiotics, not just to treat illness, but to prevent disease and to boost their growth. Antibiotics are used in the farm industry as growth promoters. So in essence, it makes the animals grow bigger and faster. And over time, that constant low-dose antibiotic use trains the bacteria living in these birds, like E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter to become multi-drug resistant superbugs. And then where do they go? Well, bacteria spread, right? We spread germs amongst each other. They contaminate our water supply, produce. Maybe the farm has more than just chicks. It contaminates other farms, and then it contaminates the person's microbiome, the farmer's microbiome, who then interacts with people. And that's how germs start spreading. So how do eggs become the perfect breakfast food? Well, eggs have been eaten for thousands of years, but not every day, folks. In the early 1900s, most families ate eggs occasionally, not as a daily staple. That changed after World War II. Industrial farming made eggs cheap and abundant. And then came massive marketing campaign in the 1970s, the incredible edible egg. Now that slogan wasn't created by doctors. It was created by the egg industry, advertisers trying to sell you surplus eggs. Now suddenly, eggs became rebranded as nature's multivitamin. And to be fair, they do contain many of the nutrients that we need in small amounts. Protein, B12, selenium, and choline. It is growing a chicken, right? From an egg to a baby chick to a chicken. But just because something has nutrients doesn't mean it's good for you every day. Remember, so does red meat. So does milk. Does that mean you should eat that every day? The question isn't what's inside the egg. It's what happens inside of you after you eat the egg. So what is this story about cholesterol? Well, if you haven't heard, the cholesterol that you eat doesn't directly equal the cholesterol that's circulating in your blood. So that means for most people, you actually don't absorb much of the dietary cholesterol that you eat, unless you're a super absorber. Now, you've probably met someone who says, I can eat eggs every day and it doesn't affect my cholesterol whatsoever. And then you can meet another person who says, I can't eat eggs for breakfast because my LDL shoots up through the roof. And really, that's biology. Different people absorb cholesterol differently. And then people who absorb cholesterol better are called super absorbers. Those intestines actually absorb much more cholesterol from their food than the average person. And under normal conditions, your small intestine, it only absorbs about 40 to 60% of the cholesterol you eat. The rest gets basically excreted in the toilet. That's because your body already makes cholesterol about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a day, mostly by your liver, and it has a tight feedback loop to regulate how much is made or absorbed. So when dietary cholesterol, when that goes up, your liver usually will slow down its own production, keeping your cholesterol more at a constant, steady level. And that's really why for most people, dietary cholesterol doesn't cause a massive shift in cholesterol spikes. However, not everybody has its feedback switch working properly. So in cholesterol super absorbers, this self-regulation doesn't work right. Their intestinal cells are highly active transporters, especially in a protein called NPC1L1, Niemann-Pick C1-like 1. Now, this transporter acts like a vacuum cleaner, pulling cholesterol molecules from the food straight into the bloodstream. And even when the body doesn't need cholesterol anymore, it still does that. At the same time, there's a problem with a cholesterol exit. Proteins called ABCG5 and ABCG8, which normally pump excess cholesterol back into the gut, they're less active. The result, eating just a few eggs a week sometimes can dramatically raise cholesterol by 30 to 50 points. Even if you're not a genetic super absorber, the way you eat cholesterol can make you absorb more cholesterol. So when cholesterol is eaten with saturated fat, like butter, bacon, fried eggs, the bile flow and mycelial formation in your gut increases absorption dramatically. So fat actually acts as a shuttle, helping cholesterol cross the intestinal wall. And so that's why studies that test eggs with buttered toast show higher LDL effects than eggs eaten plain. Now, this tendency is partially genetic. Variants in genes like NPC1L1 or ABCG5 or ABCG8, they determine how much dietary cholesterol you actually absorb. So roughly 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people, about 20-25% of people fall in the hyperresponder or super absorber category. And it's really more common in people with insulin resistance, low thyroid function, liver congestion, where cholesterol recycling via the bile acids doesn't work efficiently. So how do you know if you're a super absorber? Well, the only way for sure is to get some blood tests, some advanced lipid testing, especially ApoB, which measures the total number of LDL particles, not just your size, campisterol and sitosterol. These are plant sterols that mirror how much cholesterol you absorb. So high campisterol equals high cholesterol absorption. Lanthosterol is a marker of how much cholesterol your liver actually makes. So low lanthosterol plus high campisterol equals a super absorber pattern. So if your LDL rises slightly on a high cholesterol diet, like keto or egg-heavy diets, it's pretty much a strong clue. Now, if you suspect that you're a super absorber, simply reduce your dietary cholesterol, especially eggs, shellfish, and organ meats. Increase your soluble fiber when you eat those foods or any other foods with saturated fat, like oats and beans, to bind cholesterol in the gut and help you expel it in the toilet. Eat more plant sterols found in nuts and seeds and avocados and leafy greens. These compete with cholesterol for absorption. Avoid saturated fat because it amplifies absorption and it will raise your cholesterol in your blood due to increasing your liver's production of cholesterol. Now, support your bile flow naturally with foods high in soluble fiber, like, again, oats and flax seeds. Cholesterol absorption isn't just a genetic issue, it is also a microbiome issue. Certain gut bacteria, they can metabolize bile acids and cholesterol differently, altering how much you actually absorb. So when the gut microbiome is imbalanced, especially from antibiotics, high-fat diets, or low-fiber diets, can all make your body behave like a super absorber even without those genes. And that's why people who eat high-fiber, plant-rich diets often have naturally lower cholesterol, even with moderate fat intake. Their gut bacteria are recycling bile more efficiently and excreting cholesterol instead of pulling it back in. Some people benefit from medications that block cholesterol absorption, like ezetimibe, which specifically targets the MPC 1L1 transporter. But for most people, dietary shifts and gut health improvements can normalize absorption of cholesterol naturally. But remember, it's really the saturated fat. Saturated fat will tell your liver how much cholesterol to make. And that's a missing link. When you eat foods rich in saturated fat, like butter, cheese, bacon, your liver increases LDL production, the bad cholesterol. And not just any LDL. It increases small, dense LDL particles that burrow into artery walls and cause plaque formation. Those LDL particles, they trigger inflammation, oxidation, and immune activation. All those are the very mechanisms behind heart disease, strokes, and dementia. So while the cholesterol number in eggs may scare people, it's really the fat that alters how your body handles cholesterol.
Hi friends, I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
And here's where things get even more interesting. Several long-term studies, including those from Harvard, they actually show that people who eat just one egg per day have a 68% higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Now, how is that possible when an egg has no sugar? Well, it's because of fat. Fat interferes with insulin. Saturated fat and certain egg metabolites reduce insulin receptor sensitivity, leading to something called lipotoxicity. When the fat clogs the liver, the muscle cells, that's when you get insulin resistance. Then insulin can't deliver glucose into cells, and that makes blood sugar rise. Now, eggs don't directly raise your blood sugar. You have to eat carbohydrates to see that happen, but they can cause your body to lose its ability to handle the sugar. And that's why populations eating a low-fat, high-fiber diet, like the Okinawans or the Adventists in Loma, they have some of the lowest diabetes rates around the world, despite eating carbs every single day. They eat the opposite of a Western breakfast. There's another side of the story that most people have never heard of. Eggs aren't just a food, they're also a tool for immunization. So for decades, traditional flu immunizations have been grown in fertilized chicken eggs. And as a healthcare worker in Los Angeles County, I've been mandated to take the flu immunization every year because it changes annually. And scientists figure out the formula by injecting germs into eggs. Then they replicate, then they harvest the germs to inactivate it to convert them into immunization medicines. So today, people have a mindset that immunizations are tied to civilian public health. But the real story was written on the battlefield. Now, war has always been the greatest teacher for medicine. And soldiers, often annoyingly, they have been the world's first test subjects for medical therapies. So let's start in 1777. That was the American Revolutionary War. And who was the general? General Washington, right? George Washington. So smallpox at that time actually took more soldiers out than bullets. And George Washington, he actually survived smallpox himself. So he saw that his troops were falling faster from infection than combat. He made a bold decision to inoculate the entire Continental Army, a pretty radical act at the time. And he used a technique called variolation, taking material from a mild smallpox sore, and then he would scratch it into a healthy soldier's skin. Now, I had that happen, a skin scratch for smallpox. Mortality to his soldiers, they dropped from 30% to under 2%. And that single decision may have saved the revolution for America. Now, that decision didn't just save his soldiers. It actually planted the seed for what would become modern immunology. And for the first time, we saw that disease prevention could win wars just as surely as strategy and firepower. But it would take more than 100 years and another global conflict for the idea to evolve into modern immunization as we know it. So by the early 1900s, scientists, they finally understood germs because we had microscopes that revealed bacteria, and chemists could isolate toxins. By the time World War I happened, which was 1914, that was like 131 years later after the Revolutionary War, medicine had transformed. So now instead of scraping smallpox scabs in people, doctors could actually inject purified typhoid and cholera immunizations. That protected millions of soldiers before they ever reached the battlefield. It was the moment immunization became not just a medical act, but a strategic weapon of survival. And those germs had decimated armies for centuries. Typhoid immunization alone saved tens of thousands of lives. You know, these soldiers would go to muddy trenches where clean water didn't exist. That was the difference between an army that marched and an army that collapsed. And this was also the first time governments began producing immunization medicines on a mass scale. And this was a precursor to today's public health system as we know it. So here's where eggs into this story. During World War II, scientists discovered that fertilized chicken eggs could be used to grow viruses safely, which was a breakthrough for mass immunization production. So this led to the immunization shot that was first developed in 1945 for the US Army. Now, this medicine was literally born inside eggs. So millions of soldiers were immunized before deployment, helping prevent flu outbreaks that had taken the lives of 50 million people around the globe in just 25 years earlier in 1918. This egg-based method became the global standard for over half a century and is still used today for many flu shots, though newer cell-based immunizations are finally replacing it. And by the Vietnam War, immunizations were routine for every soldier. They received protection against tetanus, yellow fever, polio, measles, and influenza. We recently had Veterans Day. If you're a veteran, thank you for your service. Even if you weren't deployed in active duty, I know that you have given up your life literally to advance society. All veterans are required to receive these protective medicines. And you guys were the pioneers to help work out the side effects so that civilians like myself could benefit. When you get to meet a veteran or active soldier, don't forget to thank them for their service, even if it's not Veterans Day. Literally, military scientists, they tested early prototypes for immunization like malaria and hepatitis on servicemen. You know, how do you feel about that if they asked you to do it? Soldiers became the first population to experience what we now call comprehensive immunization. So many of the immunizations that are now offered to civilians today, they were perfected through the military medicine route. The army's need to keep soldiers alive in unsanitary, high-contact conditions drove much of the 20th century immunization research. And the military learned a powerful lesson. The enemy, they're not always visible. Sometimes the most dangerous threat to humanity, or literally to an army, isn't the opposing side. It's the microbes that travel with them and the mindset of individuals on whether or not you are going to play team. So today, militaries around the world still lead in infectious disease research, like biodefense labs studying how to prevent weaponized outbreaks of germs. Who would have thought from a common food that has been a cornerstone of human nutrition for centuries could actually save millions of lives in another way? Even though they're affordable and they're compact, they're full of protein, vitamins, and calories, and to some, an easy way to feed a growing world. But there's actually a darker side to the story. Now, that system that quietly became one of the largest biological reactors on Earth, well, the highly crowded farms that breed these eggs, they became breeding grounds, not only for the eggs, but for bacteria and viruses, including influenza, that mutate and that are responsible for millions of lives because of global outbreaks. Every time a bird with flu passes through a stressed flock, it has new genetic tricks. That's how avian strains like H5N1, H7N6 emerged, and why public health officials worry about the next pandemic starting not in a lab, but in a poultry farm. It's not that the egg itself is bad, it's the way that we produce it and depend on it. This has outpaced biology's limits. But as we move forward, we face a new kind of war. The war against antibiotic resistance and emerging drug-resistant pandemic strain viruses. So the question now isn't just how to protect soldiers, how do we strengthen our own immune defenses, because the system is still the same. It's still breeding a massive amount of germs. And strengthening your immune system is going to be 100% you, through your diet, your microbiome, through your health, your lifestyle. And when you do that, you're not dependent upon emergency services to survive. Now let's talk about the gut, where the real story unfolds. When you eat eggs, your gut bacteria transforms the choline in eggs into a compound called TMA, trimethylamine. Your liver then oxidizes it into TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. TMAO has been shown in multiple studies to increase the risk of heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, and even cancer. It makes platelets more likely to clot and arteries more likely to inflame. And there's one other thing that it does. It alters your gut microbiome, favoring inflammatory bacteria like Clostridia and Desulvibrio. And over time, these bacteria, they weaken your gut barrier, they increase leaky gut, and reduce beneficial species like bifidobacteria and fecal bacterium. Now that means more inflammation, more oxidative stress, and higher infection risks. And contrast that to fiber-rich foods like oats, beans, fruits, and vegetables. Those foods feed beneficial bacteria that make butyrate and short-chain fatty acids that heal your gut, that calms your immune system. Eggs simply discourage the growth of a healthy microbiome. And here's a surprising fact. People who eat eggs regularly, they tend to have higher levels of C-reactive protein, a marker of systemic inflammation. Now, why is that so? Well, maybe because eggs contain lots of arachidonic acid and omega-6 fats, and your body can convert them into inflammatory molecules called prostaglandins and leukotrienes. These compounds, they increase pain, swelling, and oxidative stress. But inflammation isn't always bad. It's necessary to fight infections. But when your diet constantly fuels it, your immune system shifts into overdrive. So that's why chronic inflammation is linked to nearly every degenerative disease, from arthritis to Alzheimer's to heart disease to cancer. And yes, higher TMAO levels from eggs consumption are also linked to increased infectious disease, mortality, especially in older adults. So even if you think eggs help your immunity by giving you protein, they may be quietly weakening your defenses. Now, different birds, maybe different eggs, maybe different issues, right? What about duck eggs or quail eggs or goose eggs? Maybe they're better. Let's compare. So on this list, the highest cholesterol level is in the goose. No wonder it's a pretty big egg, and the lowest is in the quail. If you've ever eaten a quail egg, you know how tiny it can be, right? That's actually an acceptable level of saturated fat and something you may want to consider switching. You just can't pile on the quail eggs. No matter the bird, the theme is the same. High fat, zero fiber, moderate protein, and heavy dose of saturated fat and cholesterol. And your gut doesn't care what bird it came from. It cares that you feed your microbes. So how about vegetarians who don't eat any eggs? Are there plant equivalent foods? Sure there are. Here are some whole foods that match the nutrition of an egg. And of course, every nutrient in an egg can be found in different types of plants. And they're often more protective because they come with fiber. So if you want a plant protein, tofu, tempeh, lentils. If you want a milk, soy milk, excellent source of protein. If you're looking for choline, it's in broccoli, cauliflower, soybeans. If you're looking for selenium, Brazil nuts are it. You don't need too many of them. Mushrooms also have selenium. Omega-3s, that's flax, chia, and hemp seeds. Carotenoids, that's a whole bunch of sweet potatoes, pumpkins, turmeric, as well as dark leafy greens. So what's the difference? Well, plants give you fiber and antioxidants, phytochemicals that reduce inflammation. They feed your gut microbiome instead of fighting them. But the reality is, it's not just about the egg. It's about how you eat the eggs. So are you frying it in butter or oil? Are you eating it with bacon or sausage? Or you're eating it on white toast? Or maybe chasing it down by some kind of creamed coffee? The exact food served at diners actually matter. These aren't high protein breakfasts. It's a saturated fat festival with empty carbs. There's no fiber, there's no antioxidants, there's no polyphenols, there's no butyrate. Now imagine you swap that for a savory tobal scramble with spinach, turmeric, and avocados on a toasted wheat bread. Suddenly you have an anti-inflammatory prebiotic, which is fiber, complemented by amino acids. And the health results? Get more stable energy, get sharper focus, you have improved insulin sensitivity. So really take a global approach. What about populations and longevity? So let's zoom out. Eggs are pretty much a common staple in Western diets, but for the longest lived populations, they are eaten sparingly or not at all. In Okinawa, eggs were eaten occasionally as a condiment. It's not a daily breakfast. In Loma Linda, many long-lived Adventists don't eat any eggs. They entirely avoid them. And many of them have the lowest rate of cardiovascular disease on earth. Now, in rural Africa, traditional plant-based diets with grains, legumes, and greens, they produce very little diabetes and atherosclerosis, even without cholesterol-lowering medications. The pattern is clear. The more whole food plants you eat and the less animal products or animal fat, the healthier you will be. But what really happens after you eat eggs? Let's trace what happens inside your body after a typical egg breakfast. So first, you're going to get fat absorption. Dietary fat triggers bile acid release from the gallbladder. That's why some people get pain in the right side after they eat fatty meals. That is your gallbladder contracting. What about cholesterol? What happens to that? Well, saturated fat stimulates your liver to make more LDL. However, the inflammatory cascade, arachidonic acid, converts into prostaglandins and leukotrienes. What about insulin resistance? Well, fatty acids infiltrate your muscles and liver, and it blocks insulin signaling. How about your gut microbiome? Well, that gut bacteria, that's fermenting choline into TMAs and then TMAOs. And this causes endothelial dysfunction because TMAO damages blood vessel linings and promotes plaque production. So there's going to be immune dysregulation because chronic exposure increases cytokines and weakens infection response. Now compare that to a high fiber breakfast like oats, berries, and flax. Instead of TMAO, your gut produces butyrate, an anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer molecule that nourishes your colon and your entire body. So instead of plaque formation, maybe you're improving your aortic blood flow and getting healthier arteries. The difference isn't subtle, folks. It's biochemical and rooted in infections and immunity. And the egg paradox diet, that diet that's high in TMAOs, are also linked to an increased bacterial and viral infection risk. And that may be because TMAO increases stickiness of your white blood cells, making them overactive to pathogens, but less effective at clearing them. And the results are more inflammation, less precision. Older adults with higher TMAO levels, they suffer more severe infections from pneumonia to viral responses. And you can think of TMAO as an inflammatory marker. This keeps your immune system distracted. And that marker begins in your gut, fed by eggs, meat, and cheese. But it could all have been silenced by fiber. So when it comes to labs, the labs that actually matter are total LDL, lipoprotein B, number of particles that are causing plaques, Lp(a), which is a genetic risk marker, CRP, inflammation marker, and TMAO, gut-derived inflammation marker. These reveal the quality of your lipids, not just the quantity. And the single most powerful factor that improves all lives, lower cholesterol and increased soluble fiber. That means less eggs and more oats. For a healthy egg-free breakfast, here are some practical swaps for the same satisfaction without the risk. Number 1, tofu scramble. Sauté some tofu, some onions and turmeric. Add some spinach and peppers. Maybe a chickpea omelet. Mix chickpea flour, water, and spices, and then cook it like a pancake and fold it up with vegetables. How about avocado toast with hemp seeds? You can get fiber, healthy fats, and protein. How about oat pancakes with flax seeds? No refined flour, stable energy, maybe a lentil breakfast bowl, warm lentils with sauteed greens, garlic, and lemon. And each of these foods, they actually help to stabilize blood sugar, lower inflammation, and feed your microbiome. Exactly what eggs don't do. And eggs are one of the most popular foods on earth, but that doesn't make them the healthiest. However, they're definitely a convenient source of protein, but they also deliver saturated fat cholesterol as well as gut-altering microbes that will accelerate chronic diseases. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not about demonizing a food. It's about understanding the biology of that food on your own body. And of course, cholesterol inherently isn't evil, it's required. Fat isn't evil, but the combination of animal fat and refined carbohydrates cause inflammation, microbe imbalance, and that drives a lot of chronic diseases that we see. It's important for us to get the right foods. So if you want to know more foods that can fight for your body, watch the next video.